Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today is one of those days where I'm having a subject sort of push in on my brain, meaning it wants to be covered, and I'm sitting there going, really? Don't I have to agree? And it's like, no. Nope, you got to do this episode. I could just see it now. You see somebody later. And this is where we really came to the conclusion he's a schizophrenic. The subject is mind over matter. When I see those words in my mind, they're a little cliche. There's a Twilight Zone episode that's not quite exactly the same title, but it's essentially the same thing, where a gentleman is having this life where he lives alone, he goes to work. He can't stand humans. He can't stand them during his commute in the morning. He can't stand his co-workers. There's a kid that always spills something on him every day. Spills a coffee on him. And the kid, in order to say sorry for spilling it on him one day, gave him this book, which is sort of a mind over matter book. So the guy takes the book home and he meditates on it and wishes away everyone but himself. And now he's in New York by himself, and he goes to work and he comes home and he realizes, Jesus, I don't really want nobody in the world. I just don't want people that aren't like myself. And so then the world's populated again, except he plays all the characters. He plays everyone. They have a bunch of goofy masks too that walk by the camera really fast, which is kind of funny. But he plays a woman, he plays a man, he plays an old man. Then he realizes the last thing he wants is a world that's all like himself, right? So then he wishes it back the way it was. He comes to work and he's so happy that everyone's there, that the pain in the ass commutes back. Sure enough, the kid spills another coffee on him. But this time he looks at the kid and he's like, in his mind, you can see on his face, he's like, good to have you back, kid. And then the kid at the very end says, well, what'd you think about that book I gave you? Is there anything to it? And he's all, no, it's all hogwash or whatever he said. Obviously it worked totally. He just, he went the course on changing the world, right? Now, there have been movements, and I have talked about them during Law of Attraction episodes, but this mind over matter thing has been sort of woven into other episodes and never been the core function of an episode. And I think that we'll end up going a different place if we make a dedicated episode on it. It's obviously pushing in today, so we'll let it happen. So how literal of a statement or an episode is this going to be based on the statement? Are we really talking about, are we going to have an hour-long conversation about controlling the universe? Yeah, I think so. But I think that for this particular episode, instead of it being more obtuse and a general feeling, but we'll get into that as well, but it'll be more on the minutia level. It'll be a little tiny repeat from probably the Law of Attraction or existentialism episode. I just think that when we reformat things, you get different epiphanies and different strengths, and there's got to be a reason why this is pushing in again into my brain. What if one of the greatest secrets is that you and I control this universe? I've said this in previous episodes. I literally led in with that statement. Since I made that episode, I have thought about it quite a bit. And I tell two stories from people that are probably the least likely to tell me a story that's fictional, where, I don't want to. I don't identify them just in case this was sort of told to me in confidence, but it's no big deal. But one of my friends read a book about mind over matter right in the early 60s, and he told me that he got to a point where he was controlling so much that it freaked him out, and he had to sort of detox out of it because I guess it was fairly easy to get into. A relative of mine, a female, who didn't have any spooky nature to it, but they were able to predict a lot of things that were happening, like people coming out of elevators, people who were calling, like the identity of people. So just sort of a predicting sense of the universe, not a controlling sense of the universe. The first individual was controlling. And so what's interesting is I think that man toys with the nature of being God up to the point of saying, look, I don't want to control every air molecule, every water molecule in the ocean or whatever, but I want to make sure this job comes my way, this person likes me. Control the winds of life, right? The WINS's of life. But let's just play a game with our perception of our reality, because we're really on this in season 3 here, and there's a lot of questions from you about my perception of reality and how it works. Truth of the matter is there's plenty of episodes that go on at length to answer my perspective on this whole thing, but what I am figuring out is that I think we are probably born fairly open to things in the universe, right? We're just a spirit floating into a body. We're starting to get our bearings together. Now, whether or not we do a hell of a lot of bonding to this universe while we're in our mother's womb is anybody's guess, right? A baby starts kicking. A baby, I think, has been noted as making noises at times. But then a baby's born, and it has to adapt very, very quickly to a world that is traveling at speeds that must seem infinitely fast. I mean, think about the metabolism of a child in a womb. The average ping of a thought. And hopefully there's a bit of a quarantine from the thoughts going through the mother. Although we know that stress in a mother can freak out a kid too. Hopefully the kid's not drinking aspartame and alcohol and smoking weed. But the kid is born, and there's such a circus around a child. You have the birthing process, which can be really intense depending on the smoothness of the birth itself. There's all kinds of little complications which aren't life-threatening, but can cause a tremendous amount of traffic around a child's body. Then once the child gets wrapped up, a bunch of family members want to say hi, a bunch of family members want to hold the child, which hopefully for the child is a wonderful thing. But it goes on and on and on, right? And there is a point where you get some stability, but you're kind of freaked out being a parent if it's your first child, especially because you're like, am I doing everything right? Am I doing it right? Babies do eat and excrete, and parents have to be there for every step of the way. But why go on about babies? Well, the reason why is this is where we first adopt paradigms of existence. Paradigms are usually rule sets. There's boundaries. I don't care if your room is octagon shape, square, triangle, circular, it doesn't matter. There is a bounding box around you when you adopt a paradigm. What can you do and what can't you do? But it is this binding to our universe, which is, I'm probably going to guess, I wouldn't be wrong if I said necessary. But the level at which we bind to this universe is what should be in question for every single one of you. If you bind too hard and too early, and you don't work to remove yourself from it, maybe it's impossible or becomes more difficult. I shouldn't say impossible, but you're going to have to break down a bigger door with more locks on it, right? If any of you try to kick in a door, worst thing you can do is use your shoulder, just so you know. You basically step towards the door and put the heel of your shoe right at the lock level, just to the left or right of the knob, and usually that pops the lock. But imagine you loosely shut the door. You could push it open with your hand. You loosely lock to the universe, then you become more malleable to explore the universe at a later time. But if that's a door in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in the 70s, it's got 22 locks on that thing, deadbolts, you are not getting that thing. You might as well just knock the door in, or knock the wall in, to get the door open, right? And we know people like this, that, friends and family that have really bound themselves to this universe. And for whatever reason, the unknown is terrifying, right? Some people get in the ocean, deep ocean, and they are terrified. They look down and it's just like light goes away. It's just a bottomless pit. And other people are like, man, put me in a scuba diving suit or one of those pressurized suits that can go to the bottom of the ocean and drop me 7 miles. Like somebody did that, right? 7 miles down at the bottom of the ocean. Incredible, right? So there's different types of people. The more that a person is terrified, the more they're going to say, I'm going to adopt paradigms like crazy, and I do not want to debate this with you. It is everything I can do to hang on to this paradigm I have adopted. And we don't need to change those people, and I'm not mentioning them in order to get you to think that we should change anyone else. I'm trying to kind of come around you from behind and say, park right next to you at one point, and I'm like, okay, how hard do you think you adopted your reality? It's one thing to sit and philosophize about, is this a matrix in a computer, or is this that, like I've been saying recently? But it's another thing to say, well, what do you think? And if you have an ulterior instinct about reality, then how committed are you to that alternate from the one that you wake up into every single day? Now, what's interesting is right off the bat, when we think about true mind over matter as it is sold to us in novels and television shows, it's usually some sort of telekinetic thing. It's perhaps some fusion, or you make something you make something exist out of nothing. It's sort of the video game version of mind over matter. Then you get to your more Star Trek-y stuff where someone is changing dimensions of reality as a result of thinking a certain way. Wesley Crusher. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we haven't really determined the rule set of what mind over matter could mean on this show. I think one of the most interesting things that occurs to me has to do with accidentally messing up yourself. It's like the end of Altered States, the movie with William Hurt. He gets his wish, but he gets to a point where he almost loses himself in the universe, never to return. And perhaps, who knows, if he had vanished at the end, and none of this ruins a movie for you guys. You guys should all see that movie. Brilliant film. Brilliant movie. But if he had lost himself, would he have disappeared from time itself? And everyone's like, who? What? Where? God, it was really strange. I was sitting on the bed and now I'm naked in the hallway. I don't know how that happened. The beautiful thing about the universe, especially when you and I are in a workshop of the mind toying with these notions, is that there is no evidence that someone has manipulated the world, that at least that we're in any supernatural way that we see it, right? There's a point in thinking about these sort of things where you think, well, maybe it's because I don't have enough faith in my idea. The Bible says if you have faith, you can move a mountain. All right. Well, do you look at people that are mentally insane, whether they be temporarily insane or they're a committed soul to insanity? Don't you think that they believe they can do things with complete faith that they can't do? Some people think they're superheroes. Some people think they're Winston Churchill, Jesus Christ. They don't actually turn into those people, and they don't actually incur any powers. Okay. So it would seem that the universe has a fairly resilient algorithm. You can't just think it away for everyone else. Now, I guess technically speaking, someone could think themselves out of the universe, and as long as the universe completely and entirely forgets them, no one would be the wiser. The way that we would probably notice such a thing is if, for instance, you're a child and your parents will themselves completely out of existence, as in they never existed, and there you are, the descendant of a family that never gave birth to you. That might be one way we would find such a thing, right? So what's the next step down? If you can't make course adjustments to the universe, are you allowed to make fine-tuning adjustments to the universe? I think that that's happened to me. I think it's happened to friends of mine, and I'm willing to bet whether or not you realized it or not, you've done it yourself. Which is really interesting because of the whole, the butterfly effect. That if we did change a little something for ourselves, a little Chotsky, because the universe allows it, or because we simply have that much energy influence over the universe, that it starts to change the planet. And let me give you a better analogy to that. We are a finite living creature, right? It doesn't matter when I say this as to whether or not we have a soul or not. I believe we do. But we have a collection of energy that makes up our organized history in our mind, thus our identity, etc., etc. All right. But just like a 1.5 AA battery, 1.5 volt AA battery, it's not a 9 volt battery. It could be mixed with other batteries, and we could capacitate up the energy and create a big shock that's way more than that. But by itself, it only has so much energy. Okay. So if I'm going to affect electronic equipment with this battery, there's a limit to how much influence the battery can have on the circuit. I think that might be the design of man. And imagine if the amount of energy that we are allocated as a living being is sort of in proportionate to some evolutionary law of the universe. And again, when I say evolution, I want you Christians to get all freaked out, because I'm talking about whoever created this place. I'm just not mentioning their name right off the bat. So we are a battery, right? Just like the Matrix. Individual batteries. What's beautiful about this analogy and your ability to influence your halo of existence, right, is that you would have an area of influence that your energy is capable of changing. Now, it perhaps isn't in some strict sense that you're constricted in 3D space. You could actually potentially, again, remote view anywhere in the universe sort of thing, right? But now imagine what I've said several times on the show, which is that when you mix the power of two individuals, you don't necessarily get 1 + 1 = 2 power. You get, in my opinion, potentially an exponential amount of power. Maybe 2 to the power of 2, maybe 2 to the power of 10. I don't know. it does seem a lot more than two individuals getting together. And it could be that you're resonating and capacitating and increasing your energy aperture to the universe, and thus controlling more of it. The more you hive mind, the more that you create outcomes that are the sum of your thoughts, right? By the way, I have a new neighbor that has a screaming child, so it was one of the episodes, it was really kind of eerie. There was like a screaming kid in the background. That's not some torture chamber in my neighborhood. That is my neighbor. Brand new. There was a time in my life where, probably in 1989, as a matter of fact, where I was really getting into this. And I'm not sure why, because I didn't have those other stories that I just told you from other people. I didn't have any books on it. I think I just kind of got bored and was thinking, well, let's try to figure out something where my mind could influence the results of something and it could be witnessed by other people. Because that's the clincher, right? You can do something by yourself and you're like, I did it. And then everyone else is like, sure you did. But I came up with a pretty good trick. I was renting a garage. I mentioned this a couple times, from a family in Camarillo. It was nice. It was like, it had a really nice fold out sofa bed, had a bar in it, exercise equipment, a piano. I mean, it was nice, really nice. Pantry, everything in there. Carpeted, beautiful. And one of the kids had created a pottery thing in school and hung it on fish line. It was way off to the left, up towards the ceiling. And what I was trying to figure out was, okay, let's say the mind can create waves of energy that can influence matter. And let's just say, a bit like the Dagobah scene where Yoda's trying to get Luke Skywalker to lift up the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp. He looks at the X-Wing fighter and just thinks, it's too big, I can't move that. And then this is where Yoda's like, always with you, what can't be done, something like that. Or he tries and he fails, but it's because of his lack of faith. And then Yoda's just like, boom, pulls that thing out, sets it down, and just looks at him like, you see, I told you were a pussy. So my idea was to say, I'm looking at this thing, and it would typically just rotate in one direction. And I thought, it's hanging on fishing wire. So in the area of gravity, which is more aligned with the vector perpendicular to the Earth, the rotational energy is probably going to be that of which it winds up the tension in the fishing line, and then it reverses out the tension in the fishing line. It's just going to go in this cycle from left to right based on the tension on the line. Of course, if someone opens the door or the air conditioner turns on or something, perhaps it get moved, but I don't think we had an air conditioner in this place. I don't remember a heater in this place either, but it must have been there as well. But anyway, it's the middle of summer. I had a buddy of mine. For whatever reason, my buddies like to spend the night in this room because it was just cool as hell. We had cots and stuff that we could unfold, and there was some get-together where people had to stay at the house, and I had one of my really good friends staying in the room. He's a descendant of the Calvin family, which is kind of cool. And I had been experimenting, meditating on this little piece of pottery. I mean, I swear to God, it was like maybe a 3-inch triangle. It was very organic. The kid just cut it out of something and fired it and painted it. And so I explained the whole thing to my friend. I said, look, I've been experimenting moving this thing with my mind because of its low tension, right? And he's like, really? And I said, he's a super skeptical guy, which is great. And I said, yeah, and I think I'm seeing results. I'm not telling you I'm seeing results, but I think I'm seeing results. And he goes, okay, let's do it. I said, all right. And I'm sitting up in the bed. He's at the cot. He's much closer to it. And he's just looking at it. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do anything until it finishes rotating in its current direction and reverses. Because at that point, it should want to continue in that direction for a lot longer than me intervening with it would allow. And he's staring at this thing. And I said, you tell me when to turn this thing. Because that way it's not me saying, oh, something random happened and that was me. And so he's looking at it and he goes, okay, do it. Sure enough, I could stop it and move it back the other way. I know this sounds absolutely childish and ridiculous and one of those attention-getting stories that people tell. But then he would say it again and say it again. And I was just in the frickin' zone on this thing. And he was like, wow, that's amazing. And I said, this is really happening, right? We're not like both tripping on acid somehow, right? What was interesting is I would experiment with this thing without him there. And when something really behaves the way that you are trying to, like when it happens, basically, you don't necessarily run outside and go, everybody come and look. Because at that point, I think I would probably be afraid that the more spectators, I would have doubts in myself and thus doubt in my ability to move this and therefore it wouldn't work. But with just my really close friend in the room, we played with this thing all night. I don't remember if he tried. But the idea was he was coming in a cynic and thinking, seriously, this is ridiculous. You can't do what you're saying. Now, he wasn't an asshole or anything like that, but anyway, it showed me that maybe there's a tiny bit of influence. But now when you watch a movie like Carrie, for those of you who are my age or older, she's tearing up the whole world. There's all kinds of superheroes now that have telekinetic powers, right? But, grabbing a X-Wing fighter, grabbing a aircraft carrier, moving it with your mind, who knows if that's possible if you just simply had faith. Maybe faith opens up the energy aperture of ethereal winds or whatever winds we're made out of as the living soul being. Maybe it is possible. I mean, you are affecting what we would call mass, which would be, in my opinion, ethereal winds clustering together to make atomic forces. And so your mind is sitting in there in the mind realm having to convince some sort of conveyor belt of influence on an object to get it to change. But again, we have stories, okay? I think I mentioned one of these in season 1. We have stories of Tibetan monks. And I had a really close friend of mine tell me a story about a Tibetan monk. And I was trying to filter this person out to see, okay, are you an attention getter? I mean, are you BSing me? Because I take my stories really, really serious, like my recollections of my life, when getting into this, because I don't want to be one of those people. Because I think you can get addicted to telling stories, fictional ones, right? But Tibetan monks for years have very quietly, again, they do not run around telling people what they can do. That's the other cool thing about them. They go up to a temple and they devote their entire life. They go celibate, they go quiet, they go through all kinds of levels of ascension. Maybe in 85 years old, you start getting to the top of that pyramid of ascension that they have crafted and believe in. Now, we haven't had a Tibetan Superman fly around the world and fix everything. So perhaps there are limitations, or perhaps they believe in a philosophy of non-intervention. I don't know. I've never been to one. But I had I think he was a roadie back in the 70s. And he had been on they had toured the band that they were in. I forgot who it was. It's a fairly famous band. I want to say Rolling Stones, but I'm not quite sure. But he was in the area of China or wherever this was happening. And he said that he was on a hiking mission and he got injured. And so they were so far away from society that they're going to need to fix him right away. And for whatever reason, whatever they had on them wasn't going to do it. And so they helped him up these temple stairs, sort of those Ace Ventura part 2 stairs. He gets up to a temple, and they tell everybody through translators, hey, this guy's hurt, he needs to get fixed up, he's got an infection, potentially. And the head guru guy up there, wasn't an Indian guru, but I mean this head monk, said, well, the assistance you need is in that temple over there. And he points across the chasm of this mountainous region, and there's another temple over there with its own set of stairs. And what it means is they're going to have to go, my buddy is going to have to go all the way down the stairs if they just went up, and then go up a whole nother flight of stairs on the other side. And so they start. But the people in the temple, and the people in the temple said, we'll meet you there. And so he's expecting them to come down the stairs. But they don't start going down the stairs. They don't even start packing up. And at one point, someone asked in front of my friend, are you going to help us get there? I mean, are you going to walk down with us or whatever? And they said, no, we'll just meet you there. So they go down immediately, come up immediately. They just nonstop, a whole day's trip, or half day, or whatever it took. And they get there, and the dude that they talked to in the first temple is in the second temple. It's a chasm, as it was described, like a gorge. No wires, no gondolas going back and forth between the two. And they get up there, and they're like, how the hell are you here before us? We never stopped, and you never started. And they kept getting ignored as they posed the question, the English-speaking people. It seemed like the natives, as he told the story, kind of knew what happened, quote-unquote. It's all just a claim, but it's very interesting. But this guy was, telling the story in a very astonished way. Let's just put it that way. He said eventually, after getting fixed up, on the way out, he really pushed on one of the local people, and he's like, what is going on here? How did they get up here? And he says, well, they just have methods of moving from place to place without walking. Essentially saying like a spiritual teleportation from one place to another. And that's the benefit that they have for meditating for 50 years up here. They get these powers, they get these abilities. If you hear that out of a book, you hear that on television, it's one thing. To hear it from someone who's supposedly 1 degree away from the event, I will tell you it's pretty compelling. My first question after the story was, do you have other stories like this? Tell me another story. And I thought if the guy had a story right away, then I would think, oh, you're one of those people. There were no other stories. But you'll hear these stories, and you personally can't confirm them, and so it gets frustrating, right? You just want someone to answer the question, is this possible? Right? There's all these experiments that you see from especially the 70s between the Russians and the U.S., where they supposedly capture people that actually have telekinetic powers, and then you have the Skeptic Society shows up and debunks a bunch of them. And some of these folks are unbelievable at their hoaxes, right? One of the most brilliant ones I saw was on That's Incredible, I think, which was a guy who could move the paper on a telephone book. He could turn the pages with his mind, is the way he claimed it. But what he was doing was he would exhale in a beautiful, perfect stream and kneel down to the book at the same exact time. So he created this wind out of his body to just catch a page on the book and turn it. Brilliant. Utterly brilliant. But I have seen videos where there are pinballs, at least what appears to be like a pinball, on a table, and a guy has got his hands sort of in a triangle mode, and he is got the pinball in the center of his fingers, like the old Jay-Z, I'm so on the right side of humanity pose. But you see him moving this ball on a table. Everyone thinks, okay, somehow you got a magnet on your knee or some shit. You are moving this by some trickery. But there are all these prizes that have been offered for the proving of being psychic, the proving of telekinetic powers. And to my knowledge, the Skeptic Society has absolutely never had to pay anyone any money. Some people are just rich enough to say, I would pay you $1 million of my own hard-earned money just to see an illusion become real, you know? In the book, Holographic Universe, there's a very interesting story which I covered in my episode on that book. But there was a hypnotist that supposedly hypnotized a man to believe that his daughter didn't exist. And then he had someone in the room provide a watch with an inscription on the back. And he had the gentleman sit in this chair. He put the daughter in front of him, which he couldn't see anymore because he was hypnotized. And the way the story goes, again, it's just a chapter in a book, right? A section in a book, that he holds this watch behind the daughter. So the daughter's in between him and the watch. And he says, read the inscription on the back of this watch. The guy leans down, looks through his daughter, through her belly, and reads the inscription on this watch. Imagine if that was actually a true story. Nobody really knows if it's a true story. Seems like it'd be pretty easy to recreate. If you had a hypnotist and someone who's easily hypnotized, doesn't matter. If they can see through a human being simply because they don't think the human being exists. Whoa. Whoa. That is huge, right? Imagine you could weaponize that. If you could somehow hypnotize people with beams of energy. Oh. Seems like we know a few things that can actually do that, right? So what would mind over matter really mean? What do we want from this idea, if we want anything at all? I think one of the core questions that we have to ask is, do we really want to be in a deterministic universe at all? Like, forget mind over matter for a second. Do we want to live in a universe where God has everything written down in a book, and that we just live this sort of script? You're singing a song with lyrics and notes, and it can't be any different because this is just the way the song is sung. I think most of us don't want to be in that world, right? So what would make you think that you'd want to live in a world where you determined absolutely everything? And what if you're not God and you can't get everything right, and you're able to undo something, but you can't put it back? People say all the time, I'd make myself different in this particular way. What if you found out that the way you made yourself different ended up making you, unpopular? You forget who you really were, and at some point you regret it and you want to put yourself back, and so what are you trying to do? You're trying to look at photographs, but maybe because you made yourself different, you changed the history of the photographs, and you can't get an image of who you were. So you can't put yourself back. Oh, you can kind of change your hair color back, but it's not really the hair color that you had because you never paid attention to who you were before you start altering things. You change a little piece of history or a little piece of the now, and someone dies as a result of your change. Oh my God. But you don't know how to handle the reversal of your damage, right? How many of you have lit a fuse on a bomb called a firecracker, and that thing blows something up? Well, it's pretty easy to light the fuse, but what wouldn't be easy is to put the window back together, to put whatever you blew up back together. So the noise you may or may not hear in the microphone, the tumbling, crushing noises, the house that was destroyed behind my house by this family it's we're at 10 months now, and they are still shoveling the damaged pieces and parts into a trash can for tomorrow's trash. But now, are you able to do things in this world if you believe you can't? Any genre of anything. And what happens if you're coaxed by friends, or you somehow put yourself in a situation where you try something you've never done before, and then you're able to do it, and all of a sudden now, for the rest of your life, you know you can, even if it's difficult or it's lucky that you were able to do it, you still know there's a way that you can pull it off, right? If we're to ever get to a point of mind over matter, even in a small influence of your own circle, and it may be that you simply concentrate on things that are positive versus negative. Maybe that's all you want. Maybe that's all you need. You're like, hey, God, I don't necessarily want to control everything, but this situation where I don't have a job or I don't have a companion in my life, I need your help, And I'm going to dial in the frequency of my own mind to attract that to my life. Now, law of attraction is interesting because it is the slow version of what we're talking about. Mind over matter is always sort of thought about in the brain as this instantaneous realization of a conception. I want that table to be red in my backyard instead of green. And then boom, the pigment and the paint changes. Everything else stays the same. Its age stays the same. All its dents and nicks and mess ups are still the same, but the green is red now. All right. The subject of mind over matter really appeals to me because it calls out this sort of blind spot in our perception of our reality, doesn't it? I mean, you don't think you can. And that's before you even try. You're certain you can't. If I took you to a marine base, a naval base, sorry, I didn't say marine, but a naval base, I point an aircraft carrier and I say, move that thing 10 feet to the right. Not a teleportation, but just move it. Just push it with your brain. It'll be fine. The anchors will probably fight back and all that kind of stuff, but slosh it around a little bit with your brain. One, no one ever says that to you, first and foremost. But two, even if someone did say that to you, you'd be like, what are you, crazy? What are you talking about? Move this thing. It's a gigantic, several 100,000-ton thing. Okay. Now, obviously, we'd have to be careful, right? What if it was just a matter of detoxing your brain out of paradigms and all of a sudden you're capable of doing things? Again, plenty of crazy people in the world who have not been able to do these things. People who have taken psychedelic drugs and watched their hands melt. Now, they believe while they're looking at their hand melting, especially if they don't have a guide, that is actually occurring. But it's not occurring. At least it's not occurring in our realm. And they do come back out of that trip. Their hand's fine. It's okay. So again, what the negative result calls out is the notion that there is something in place that seems to be much bigger than our consciousness. Because again, I feel like if you think about all the energy in the universe that's holding this place together, regardless of what you think you're seeing, there's a lot more of it than us, right? Just get in your car and drive around and just look at mountains and look at plants and everything. Man creates a lot of stuff on this planet with our tools, man. But something is holding the majority of this place together. And I'm going to say, I don't know about you, but I feel like I control a thimble of any eventuality. And mine is very, at this point in my life, primarily a cause and effect model, right? I do something, I tippity type on my keyboard, and a screenplay comes out. An email gets created. I mix some paint together and I put it on a canvas and there's a painting. So mine is very cause and effect. And, there's a lot of wonderful rewards for cause and effect models, right? You could make love and have a child, right? I don't think that we have these thoughts. My question is are we not having the thoughts that we can change the universe or control a lot more than we control because of organic paradigms of trying to become human or whatever, a living being of any kind? Or has it been genetically programmed in us to have these limitations? Is it merely a result of proving to ourselves before we lose our more celestial form when we're born, right? We seem to be very psychic when we're born, and we lose that psychic ability as time passes, because at some point we do need to blend with the majority. Do we prove to ourselves either one of two things? Do we prove to ourselves as a child, well, I really don't want to do that. I've just came out of the celestial realm of existence with God and all my relatives and a bunch of other life beings, and the game is not to mess with this universe. The game is to endorse this universe. And so we calm down and we accept. And we're not regretful. Maybe even someone says, well, look, here's the deal. Okay? When you're human, okay, you have this proprietary platform called human, right? And you are going to have appendages and so many senses that you're going to be able to recognize right off the bat. And we put some little secret ones out there that if you extend your brain a little bit, you'll have some potentially other abilities, like maybe seeing auras, or you'll maybe be a little psychic, you'll be able to see the future, or you'll be able to understand reality better than other folks. But, overall, you're in this vessel, and that's just the way it is. But we put this little thing in there, this little playground for you, okay? Because you did just come from the heavenly realm, where things are much more dynamic, and there's no constraint of time, and there's no birth, life, and death. There's no 3-stage life. We put this little playground in there, and we put an imperative on your body so you don't go crazy being human, that you dream. You go to bed and you dream. And sometimes you'll remember it, sometimes you won't, but you're always going to do it, whether or not you remember it or not. And so that's sort of how we keep sanity. And so again, you accept it. How many times you wake up in the morning and you really remember your dream, and then later you can't remember it at all? I had this thing. I thought I was going to remember it, but I don't remember it. The dreams that I think you can really remember are the ones that you can cast into this reality, right? But the more nebulous your dream is, there's less things in this world that you can compare things to. I dream that one of you and I meet, and we're at a restaurant, we go to a softball game, we chill out at a cigar lounge that's outside, it's beautiful, we have a good time. And when I wake up, I'm like, okay, I have been to a restaurant, I have been to a smoke lounge, I've been to a baseball game, softball game, whatever. I've been to these things so I can map them to this reality. And therefore my ability to remember that dream is very intact. But the second that you and I spend time just as life forces floating around in some infinitely vast void of existence, and we're having this amazing feeling conversation between us, and then I wake up, I'm like, I have nothing to compare that to. I can't hang on to it as easily with my brain. So what if those that don't dream, quote unquote, are actually dreaming, but nothing that they dream about is mappable to this universe? And so they feel the wonderful completion of REM sleep and dream and delta and all that good stuff, but they simply can't remember it because not a single piece of it belongs in this universe. Now, one of the byproducts of taking this conversation from concept to fruition, and perhaps back, is that we, like I said in my episode, way back in season 1 when I made the episode called The Answer, way back in episode 1 when I made an episode called The Answer, if we get to the edge of this sort of audition to be God, right, which should just be a terrifying thought process, to be honest. Maybe what we find out through this mind over matter exercise for the mind and studying the butterfly effect that might occur, studying the overwhelming responsibility that one would inherit in trying to become God, that we essentially discover how lucky we are, how utterly lucky we are that someone else or something else is taking care of the universe for us, and that simply being in this human body with other humans, as frustrated as you might be with their decisions in life, is truly the most ultimate gift that we could possibly ever experience. I guess I shouldn't be so absolute about that, but the idea is this is one of the coolest things you could do, because it is real. There's a great correlation between where we are in this conversation and the show on HBO called Westworld. For those of you who haven't seen it, this will not spoil anything for you. Ed Harris plays a character dressed all in black. And the entire show, we're now in season 2, I think episode 5 just aired last night. He is looking for a game. And the gist of it's very simple. And this is where we get to the non-spoiler 100%. This world is, for those who've never seen the show, it's about human beings that have created an amusement park that has essentially robots they call hosts. And they have a Western world. And you can go and be in a Western movie, basically. But you, as a human, who is considered a guest of this, cannot be murdered by a host, but you can do anything you want to a host. You can have sex with them, you can kill them, whatever. Ed Harris reveals very quickly in the first episode that he has been going to this place for 30 years. And he is sort of done with this God mode to the video game, where there's never any ramifications for anything he does. He's never really in threat. He's played out every single scenario the writers can come up with, and even if they come up with a new narrative, it's just a spin on the ones before. And so he knows that there is a place that he can go somewhere in the park, or something's going to happen or something. It's still kind of confusing, where it gets real. He could die if he's shot by a host. He could die because the host could stab him in the gut or cut his throat or whatever. And he is in his elderly age. He's not in his 70s or 80s in this, but he's definitely at a point where I want something real. I've had everything in life. You learn he's a very rich man as well. Anyone who can go to this park is very, very wealthy. I'll let you figure out everything else by watching the show. But he has reached a point where he's sitting there saying, look, even if I die playing this other side of the game, if I can find it, that's better than being what I am today. And let me tell you, season 2 just rocks this storyline on a level that's amazing. What if that's us in a way? What I think they're doing with Westworld and the themes that they are acting out in Westworld is nothing shy of absolutely brilliant. And they are also playing with the notion of what does artificial intelligence really mean to us. So, a great story, a great fictional story will make you look inside yourself deeper and deeper and deeper. And again, television shows are the best way to tell stories because you get hours and hours and hours. There's 10 episodes to every season of Westworld, which means they have told 10 hours in the first season and 5 hours in the second season already. So 15 hours. That would be about 12 to 14 deep thoughts. Except it's much more entertaining, of course. If you're very observant, that show will really get you to ask yourself some very fundamental questions about what is reality, what is life, what is intelligent life, and what are you doing with your life today in the real world, non HBO series. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What matters? What doesn't matter? One of the caveats to waking up is, to all the untruths of the world, is to reassess your purpose for living. One of the themes that comes with that is gaining control over your mind, gaining control of your reality, right? So mind over matter conversations tend to go to a point where you're saying, well, geez, let's just get ultimate control, complete control over our world, over your particular world, yours specifically. Once you find out there are certain individuals in this world that have been very evil, it's very common to want to sort of wish them away, wish them into the cornfield, right? Get rid of them. Maybe in some short, constrained implementation of that idea, you would make the world a better place for a little while, until perhaps opportunity breeds greed and breeds corruption, absolute, right? Turns into power. We know that teaching history is important because if we don't, then we repeat it. All the cause and effect models that have hurt us. Wouldn't it be a gift from God to live in a world where you feel comfortable being who you are? That you're completely comfortable, and that everything that you're experiencing, both what you might consider to be positive and negative, turns out to be a positive. More than just a positive, but a complete euphoric experience. So I think you feel me. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's video, audio, locked Facebook group, and Patreon. Hopefully this was a useful conversation. Let's compare notes. Please post in the comments section. Appreciate all your views. Are we living the dream right now? Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.